Welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast, where any combination of Dr. Ross, Christian, and Brian host national experts who share winning ideas to manage money and the home as a team. Today's topic is the financial considerations and conversations to have before getting married. And we could not think of two better people to host to have that conversation. Our guests today are Scott Glasgow and Matt Frey. Scott Glasgow is the founder of FinMango, an international program making financial literacy and inclusion universally accessible and useful to 1 million plus youth per year. He's received international recognition in dozens of media articles, including CNN, the New York Times, and NBC. Mr. Glasgow's former education includes the Harvard Kennedy School Executive Education Program and an MA in Financial Economics. Matt Frey is the Communications Director and Policy Advisor for the Kentucky State Treasurer Allison Ball. Before joining Treasurer Ball's staff, he was the Executive Director of the Kentucky Financial Empowerment Commission. Mr. Frey has 5 years of experience in researching financial literacy and financial education, most recently under the world-renowned Dr. Anna Maria Lasardi at the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center in Washington, D.C. Enjoy today's show.
Matt and Scott, we are thrilled that you could join us today.
Thanks for having us on, Brian. Excited to be here.
Yeah, super excited.
So I want to go straight into this driving question that we have been getting from listeners, because not all of our listeners are married. And a lot of them have asked, what are the kinds of conversations or considerations that you should have, in particular as it relates to managing money in advance of marriage? And the goal of this podcast is that we will ultimately answer that question. But before we do, we are so thrilled that people of your background would be here. Could you maybe walk our listeners through your career journey so our listeners have some context? Scott, let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. So my story started really when I was just a really young kid. My dad used to buy me a little bit of shares and different stocks like Disney and things, and just for me, it was kind of like empowering just to know that I was like, I went to Disney World and I owned part of this, even though it really was nothing. And I don't know, the 2008 financial crisis hit my family really, really hard. And I was in high school at that time, and it kind of really got me interested in understanding how money works and how I didn't want to be in the position that my parents were at that time. And I ended up going to college. I was really passionate about personal finance, even though I majored in the sciences and biology. And I don't know, when I went to grad school, I ended up switching from the sciences back to, where my heart is like with money. And I went to a master's program in financial economics, and I had this professor that just started ranting literally my first day in my first class in grad school. And the professor just started ranting like financial literacy, financial inclusion is the crisis of our lifetime that nobody knows about. So I raised my hand. I said, what's the solution? What are people doing to effectively solve this problem? And the professor went, oh, I don't know. 3 hours passed, and the answer was, oh, I don't know. At the time, that class was called Financial Management, and the nickname was called FinMan, and that's the first part of the name of FinMango. And the second part comes from the fact that, whenever it comes to money, it's such a dark subject. It's something that people don't want to talk about.
Right.
So I wanted something bright, colorful, energetic to break into that darkness. And what's better than a mango? So right. FinMan plus mango is FinMango, and launched way back in 2017, never really had any intentions of it kind of growing outside of, a few schools in Akron, Ohio. And, like 6 years later now, we're still teaching, pretty much all the schools in Cleveland, Ohio. It's an investment course. And now we're expanding doing really big projects with Google and stuff around the world. And just kind of cool. Just kind of, take a passion and actually create action and impact in the world, and, happy to help.
And how many volunteers do you have with FinMango?
So at our peak, we had several hundred. Currently, we have around 38 active volunteers. And so it's pretty cool.
That is great. And Matt, if you wouldn't mind, can you walk us through your journey?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. As I said, Brian, thanks so much for having us on. Modern Husbands is such a great niche focus on conversations of, and pushing conversations around finances for men, for couples, because finances can be a sore subject for a lot of people, can develop a lot of anxiety, and especially for couples. And so I think it's great that you're developing some content and, and normalizing the conversation on this front. And so A little bit about me. I'm from Kentucky. I was born in Louisville, grew up in northern Kentucky, so not far from where you are, Brian, on the northern Kentucky side of the Ohio River. And I come from a family of entrepreneurs. My grandpa, my dad's side started a business, and then my dad has started a handful of businesses himself. And so money has always been a part of our conversation growing up, something that we always talked about. We were always talking about investing. We're always talking about how we had to manage our money to do certain vacations growing up. So it's something that was always present for me. But I didn't really have this spark ignite for myself and really take an interest in what we all are really passionate here until I got into college, and my major was economics. And I just thought economics was such a fascinating subject since the study of people and their decisions. And I was like, I want to do more in this. I just want to do more in this however I can. So I connected with a professor that taught my first econ class that I ever took, and he was doing financial literacy research. And I worked with him over the course of college. And through the research that I worked with him on, I found that this works, this education works. So I saw the evidence. I helped develop the evidence. And then once I finished college, I was like, I think this is so cool. I want to continue to do this. And so I went and got my master's. And when I went and got my master's, the school I went to had a research center, the Global Financial Literacy Excellence Center with Dr. Anna Maria Lusardi. And it was such a blessing to work for her because she's such a leader in this field. I was so excited to do it because I got to continue to build and add to the evidence that financial education works. And so I come at it from this research background that I had seen, through academia of how financial education works. But then I was like, I kind of want to put my money where my mouth is. So when I finished grad school, I had the opportunity to lead the Kentucky Financial Empowerment Commission, which is a nonprofit that works out of the Kentucky State Treasury that works with all Kentuckians, from teachers and high schoolers to Kentuckians with disabilities, to help them with their financial education. So we developed a few different initiatives around that. And I did that for a year, and I thought it was great because I believe in this work. I believe that it works. I've developed the evidence that makes it work. And after doing that for a year, I transitioned to be the Kentucky State Treasurer's Communications Director and Policy Advisor. So we still get to do a lot of financial literacy work. But that's how I got involved in this financial literacy education field, and I'm really excited to be able to be involved with it with your group as well, Brian.
Well, we're honored that you would join us on the podcast, but of course, to be on our advisory board, your voice is representative of so many young men who are just on the verge of marriage, where it's coming, and you're starting to think about those conversations, and you're having those conversations with your friends. But what separates yourself from many of those people is that your education background and your passion is really managing money. I mean, Matt, Dr. Lusardi, for those of you who are unaware in the academic world, is recognized as one of the world's leaders in financial literacy space. And so when Modern Husbands came together, what people continue to tell us is that eventually we need to get to a place where we're providing some pretty direct support for folks who are transitioning to marriage, because that's where habits are formed. That's where seems to be the most anxiety, or at least commonly there's a lot of anxiety. And so that's what we're doing as we continue to grow and branch out. So if you wouldn't mind, can you, Scott, why don't you do this for us? Can you explain how you would start a conversation about finances just with a date? So you're going out, you're not married yet, you're dating. How do you start that conversation? When do you start that conversation? And then, Matt, when he's done, if you wouldn't mind, just chime in with your thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think for me, it's just about just having that ability to be transparent and really just initially when you're in an early stage relationship, it was really when I was in my early stage of my relationship, we would talk about, like our future goals, and what do we want to see us be, like, where do we want to be at 10, 20, 30 years from now? And what type of life do we want to live? And then once you have that conversation, just kind of be transparent about, your money, and be transparent with how you're spending, and just, talk about it. Have set times where you can kind of, hey, like, let's talk about our finances, and understand that you might come at different backgrounds. I know me and my girlfriend, we have really strong financial backgrounds, and also their families, and just understand their differences and just being transparent, I think is really key, because I see so many people, they don't want to talk about it. As I said before, money, finance is a dark subject. People just want to run away. And it's really important to just kind of very beginning, be transparent about it and keep it an easy conversation and just flow naturally into the relationship, is you don't want that to be a problem down the road. And all too often, as we see the statistics, it's bad. Money is a really big component of relationships and killing it. Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree, Scott. And something I want to expand upon that you mentioned there is early and often. And finding a way to do that is important, because if I just go out on my first date or first few dates, I'm like, how much student loan debt do you have? That's a lot. But if we can ease into that, like put our feet in the water by saying like, hey, let's pick this restaurant over this restaurant because it's a little bit more affordable in my budget, and verbalize that, share that with your partner, with your significant other, then it's a good way to step in that direction and then kind of ease into the conversation of some more serious items where you could start talking about how, this is how much my rent is. And then you could possibly scale that to like, I have student loan debt. I don't. I think there's a very easy way to start this conversation and have it early on. I can't emphasize enough. Doing that in the first few dates actually goes a long way because it normalizes the conversation. And then I think you'll be in a good place in the long run because you won't be stuck thinking like, I have anxiety about bringing this up with this girl or this person I've been dating for 6 months, 8 months. Because, that's a lot of time to spend together. And you don't want to have to be like, hey, let's start talking about this now.
I love the fact that you openly said, hey, this restaurant does or does not fit into my budget. And it's just the fact that you're bringing that up and that you're cost conscious and that you're showing that, financial responsibility is important to you. Because I can see saying that in front of certain people where it would be off-putting. And for me, if I saw that and if that continued to be an issue, I know that that's the red flag. Like I could not be married to somebody like that because it would be an ongoing struggle. So I love the subtlety of recognizing something like that to see, are they judging you? That was one of the things that we've run across in Modern Husband is that there's this tie, this bond between money and masculinity. And to be able to openly say, I can't afford that, or that's not in my budget, or I'm not, that is hard for some men. But it takes a very confident man to be able to do it. So thanks for sharing that. And so kind of moving on, like as you're dating, there's a point, and I don't know when it's different for everybody. For me, it was after about 6 months where you realize, hey, I've invested some time here, and you need to start to really think about whether or not this is the right fit for you, and you should continue to date. And so as you're going through this, financial pain points are likely to come up, right? Some things that create some distress, some frustration, tension. What is it, Scott, in your experience that has come up that has created some challenges? And then Matt, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, for me, it's really interesting because me and my girlfriend, we both kind of come from different worlds. I have no student loan debt. I got to go to school for free. Because of that, I was able to work. I was able to save money. I was able to invest at a younger age and be in a really strong financial position. My girlfriend, she went to a really top-notch school out west in California.
Where did she go?
Stanford University.
Okay.
And so a lot of money in debt. And then she went to medical school, which was more student loan debt. And so now she's a pediatric surgeon resident, and, she has good earning potential in the future. But, we're both here in our early 30s now and kind of in different financial worlds. And it's a lot different because I'm so used to being kind of free and being able to just, I'm very frugal as well. I'm just trying to always save to invest. And in her career, she has to keep on moving. She has to go to different areas, rotations, just a lot of money spending. And it's kind of out of her control because that's part of her career. And on the other side, I'm just frugal. I don't like to spend money on anything unless I have to. And we come to have to make some compromises, but it's been definitely tense. I have to, I want to support her. I want to move with her to different locations and stuff. And that is, a financial pain point for us.
Well, you brought up something that I'm seeing becoming a pattern with other Modern Husbands advisory board members. And that's 40, 50 years ago. If you were a couple were to move because of a career, typically it was his career, a man's career. But now, dual income households are the majority in America. Roughly 2 in 5 households have female breadwinners. And, sounds like that your girlfriend's going to be doing just fine financially. Yeah. That makes it a little more complicated, doesn't it? So now there's 2 people that might have to move around in order to advance in their careers. Matt, have you had to deal with any of that? And if so, explain how you handled it and any other pain points that you've had to face.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I think I have a little bit of experience, and it's also experience that's fresh to me as well. I've been dating my girlfriend for 6 months now. She is an assistant volleyball coach for UK. And there is, there's high earning potential there, but there is also the possibility for her to move. Yeah. And so, like we said in the first question, it's important to us to have conversations about that early and often, that there's the prospect of her going somewhere, of her moving up in her career. And I think we're putting a forethought into that, and definitely very conscious of the financial impact, but also the relational impact that will have. And something that was difficult for me, and Scott, I want to thank you for, being vulnerable and sharing that, because I think that's where it's the most insightful for everyone. But something I learned in other relationships of mine, when we didn't have that conversation about where the relationship was trending on a consistent basis, and that frequency is different for everyone, but finding out that frequency for your relationship is really important, because it will apply so well to the emotional conversations, the monetary-based conversations that you have in so many other areas. That Meredith and I have talked about this early and often, and we're aware that right now we're not running into those conversations or decisions, but we're conscious of them and we are anticipating them. And so it's not going to, just be caught out of the blue. It's like, what? You got offered to be the head coach of Nebraska volleyball? Like, what? That's moving us all the way here. Like, how does that throw a wrench into things? Not to mention how my career could get up and move too, because that's definitely a possibility and something that shouldn't be taken for granted, because a relationship is a two-way street, right? And so I think just early and often, not to stick too much to a theme here, but I think that makes a lot of sense in different components of a relationship, whether it be financially related or professionally related, because those things are interlocked. They are very connected.
A quick moment of appreciation to our sponsor, Money Marriage University, the creator of the Transition to Marriage Toolkit, which is the go-to resource for engaged and recently married couples who want to manage money and the home as a team. Reserve your spot to receive the Transition to Marriage Toolkit at modernhusbands.com. Now back to the show.
And you both hit on a challenge that is relatively common for college graduates, because obviously what's happened over time is that more and more frequently people who marry are both college graduates, or they both have post-secondary degrees, and subsequently they both have advancement opportunities that are not limited to a local area. And really, obviously personal finance isn't just about managing money. It's about earning money too. And that is what you both talked about is really tough. I know the college coaching world, that could be a lot of moving around. Mm-hmm. And is this in either of your cases, like, is this something where there's an understanding that, Scott, I'll start with you, like are you more flexible and you're just going to follow her, vice versa? How have you negotiated those conversations?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really tough. And actually, to put more context, me and my girlfriend are actually in that position right now. She has to move back to finish her residency. She did like a 2-year research fellowship in Ohio, and she has to move back to Minnesota to finish up her residency for the next 3 years. Mm. And so we're planning up that trip, where we're going to stay, the budget and what we can afford and stuff like that. So it's been like an intense, we knew it was coming. We've been preparing for it, and now it's getting a lot more intense. Mm. And I guess, back to your question, like, I am more flexible. Her career, she has to be there. She has to be in the hospital taking care and doing surgeries. I'm working remotely. I can make that a compromise. But now it's more questions of, what type of place do we want? Maybe my girlfriend wants to upsize a little bit. I want to, I prefer to let's try to live off of just like one income. So we have extra money that we can, have to put away, and having those conversations. So it's kind of it's an interesting period, when you're making that transition, because it can be really intense, but at the same time, you have to make those compromises, both of you, to make things happen. And that's what we're doing right now.
Okay.
I don't know if I got to your question.
You did. And I was, the conversation that you're having is, the same conversation that you'll have again and again and again, is assuming that you get married, because you'll move and there's always this give and take. And what the research has said is that typically in a relationship, one person is more of a saver and the other person is more of a spender. And oftentimes those opposites attract, and that can be beneficial. But there can also be, natural points of friction. Matt, what about you two? Is there just kind of an understanding that you just play it by ear and you look at the circumstances?
Yeah. So within the first month of Meredith and I dating, like I don't think I'm getting ahead of myself, but I was like, I like this girl. Like I could see this getting serious. And so we had a conversation about how long she saw herself being in Lexington. And then something that is also important to relationships, and I've seen this in friends and family of mine as well, is that where they're from and then their relationship with their family is also important to that too. And so Meredith is from Louisville. I'm from Northern Kentucky. I have family in Louisville as well. So not only is she based out of Lexington right now, she also has family local to here. So there's a reason to be coming back in addition to her professional reasons to be in Kentucky, right? And I think that's really important in the long run for things, because, career could follow its trajectory. And then it's like, hey, we could ultimately return here. But speaking more to the short term, though, we have one of the first conversations we have in the first month of us dating was about how long we saw each other being in the state. And our timelines for that matched up. It's going to be several years. And that's really important because we know that the how long we're going to be in the state aligns, which means, we're going to be here, we're going to be able to invest in our relationship, and that's great. Our lives are going to grow together. And then, life changes so quickly. I think we've learned that, in the past 3 years more than ever. And we know that, okay, we're going to be here for the next several years together, and then a lot can change our lives, and we'll approach that when we get there.
So do you find yourself having, because you're both, personal finance experts, so I would imagine friends are kind of coming to you asking questions relating to that. What are some of the common, themes or challenges that you all have seen just from your friends, late 20s, early 30s, the challenges they're facing in their relationships? Scott?
I've seen a lot, and unfortunately, a lot of it's been negative. I think it goes back to people not talking about it early on. I have friends that literally got married, then divorced quite quickly after they found out like how they just couldn't get along financially. And one example is I had this one couple, obviously I'm not going to say their names, but like had this one couple friends, like they would throw all their money and come into this one bank account, a joint bank account, and no one was watching. And, then there was this drama of like when, the spouse or the husband would be spending money, they would start fighting, thinking that they're taking too much. They're taking part of their income and all this other stuff, and they would have no money to save or retire. It was just a big mess. And I see a lot of it, and it's something that it can be avoided with just simple things. Right. But it's really sad to see.
Yeah, it is a difficult thing to observe. And the way that I've seen it come up, because I'm 25, and so I have a lot of friends that are in the phase of getting married, getting engaged, and they're starting to move beyond like the entry level position kind of job description that you have right out of college. And where I've seen people run into the most issues is professional goals not lining up, where it's like, I anticipated doing X, but that didn't work out for whatever reason. But my significant other is still pursuing their professional career and didn't run into a roadblock of sorts. And so that's another thing that you got to be conscious of and be willing to anticipate and be flexible around, because you can have a lot of trust in, I show up every day. I do a great job, but sometimes things don't work out. Sometimes there are things outside of our control. And so you just have to be ready for those conversations, because again, as I mentioned earlier, the professional component is directly linked, is highly connected to your financial situation.
Yeah. Wow. That's a good point. And, Scott, when you were talking about, the fact that neither of them was really paying attention to their shared bank account, the research says that that's not uncommon. And I know that if you've listened to this podcast before, that I'm going to sound like a broken record, but every expert says the same thing. You simply have to have regular conversations about your financial circumstances. It really comes down to that. And there's a lot of different strategies that you can use to be able to do those. And one of the strategies that I think it was Dr. Klontz that told me this, that pertains to the conversation, Scott, that you're having right now, with your girlfriend. And then, Matt, if you move, this will happen with you, is, how to anticipate, one of you perhaps not wanting to spend as much on, rent or a home or whatever, wherever you're going to live. And then the other one knowing, hey, I can afford more and wanting more. The advice was to simply, just a casual conversation before this opportunity even arises, ask a question like, hey, if we got, let's say we were together and we were making $50,000 more a year, what would you want to do with the money? And that conversation it'll give you some insight, some ideas of what they're thinking, what you're doing, or what you're thinking. And then you can begin to work together on that in a non-threatening way, because it's just a kick back and relax kind of talk, rather than waiting until it actually happens. And then there's some stress, right? There's a little bit of tension. So during the pre kind of marriage planning process, one of the challenges that my friends faced and others face is how much to spend on a wedding versus how much to save for your actual life. So just to simplify things, let's just say the parents are not contributing, or they're not contributing much. So the couple is primarily responsible for paying for it. Have either of you two had conversations with friends that are going through these types of challenges?
Scott, go ahead.
Yeah. I have quite a few friends. I mean, I feel like often, like a lot of friends, like they think they have to have something really big and glamorous and very expensive. And unfortunately, they eat up a lot of their savings to put on those weddings, put on those shows. And it's something that's, I mean, for me and my girlfriend, this is probably private, might need to cut this, but we actually don't really even want to have a wedding. She just wants, that was her decision. And I support, I've actually kind of been the same feeling, just kind of we decide to get married. We just want to get married and maybe have like a small gathering or something like that. But I know a lot of friends that, they throw on big parties, very expensive. And I also know some that I think do a really good job. I had one friend that, had it where it was like controlled environment, where it was just a small group, at their house. So I think it depends on who you are, but I think it's nonsense to pay too much money for a wedding. I think every personal finance person would say the same thing.
Yeah. The numbers. Yeah. Yeah. Matt, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. So I have a close friend of mine who got married actually a year ago, almost to the day. And they didn't, religion can play a big role in the marriage conversation. And that is not something to neglect. And so it's something that they had a conversation with their family about, and that actually put them in the scenario that you've given us, Brian, where they, my close friends were solely responsible for paying for their wedding. And what it led them to is that, we want to have an intimate ceremony, and we want to do it in a way that's very us as well. And so what that led to is that, they were both from the Cincinnati area. And so they wanted to do it there. They wanted it, my friend was from the Kentucky side. She was from the Cincinnati side, the Ohio side. And so, so they wanted to do one thing on one side and one thing on the other side. So that drove their venue, that drove the hotel location, where, reception, after party, would be as well. But then I think kind of the most important thing of all that drives all of those decisions, so to take one step back, is how many people are invited. And so, I'm from the same area as they are, and come from a Catholic family. And so we have a lot of, I have 10 cousins just on one side. And so that's 10 people plus their parents and grandparents. Like you get to like 15 people with just one side of the family. When it comes to my situation. And so that, and then not to mention, the significant other side of the family. So that list with just like close family can be like 35 people. And that's a lot of people to pay for their dinners, et cetera. And so I think starting with that list, that was important for them. And they were reserved. They're like, it'd be great. We could easily do 200 people for this, but let's like let's take a step back and really figure out who we think can go, who we're not putting in a precarious financial situation to go. Because sometimes, like I said earlier, relationships are two-way streets. And so sometimes sending out that wedding invite to someone who you're friends with, maybe not necessarily like you haven't talked to on a frequent basis, you're putting them in a position where they feel obligated to do that and spend that money. And so you can put some forethought into it, not put a friend in that situation if you think that's where your relationship is. And obviously that's a situation to situation decision. And so I think figuring out that guest list goes a long way, because there's a big difference between, I think they ended up having around 85 people at their wedding versus like 100, 150, 200. Like I've heard I've been to some giant weddings. And so that guest list really can drive and change things. I think another component that I just want to make sure I add here, Brian, and I alluded to it earlier, is the role religion can play in it. Because if you have a wedding in a church, it could be expensive because there's the flowers that come with it. There's a lot of things, a lot of the decorations, and probably stuff that I don't know about because I'm a guy that makes it an expensive component of the celebration. But then I think having the religious piece, and there are other ways to do this too, can be a great opportunity to talk about money. Another friend group of mine, they got married, I think 2 or 3 years ago at this point, and they went through pre-Cana, which is the Catholic marriage preparatory process. And they said they had conversations, and they always talked about money. There was always a frequent conversation. They had conversations about money that they hadn't thought to discuss because of that program. And to shamelessly plug here, I think that's something that modern husbands can do, is it can promote that conversation and suggest some angles people don't think of.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. That is the direction that we're adding as we continue to grow, because these kinds of decisions oftentimes are influenced by traditional norms or they're perhaps like societal expectations. And when you're thinking about spending $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, for one night, people need to really make sure that they're thoughtful of how the trade-off decision, what they're not going to have as a result of that. And there's nothing wrong with spending $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 if that's what they decide to do, if that's what makes them happy. I know, Scott, I'm with you. Like, I just cringe at thinking about, spending that kind of money. And like in my own mind, my thought is, God, think about how great it could be if we could just have a potluck dinner and, have a really simple reception. But that's just not the norm for everybody. But that's such an essential conversation, because that's a lot of money that you don't have to start your life, to maybe put a down payment on a home or to pay off a student loan. And those things ultimately make your life less stressful. So I do want to transition into a reality that we're seeing of people waiting longer and longer to get married, or less people getting married. And that's something that's been a phenomenon occurring over the last, particularly 15 years. And, I know, Scott, you're in particular, you're over 30 now, right? How old are you? 31?
31 now. Yes.
31. Yeah. So what is it that is perhaps causing pause, for your generation? And then if you wouldn't mind following up.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it was just, I was in no rush. It's actually, I think I have a different context. Again, I went to the school I went to for undergrad was like a small Christian private school, and it had like the nickname of being like the Ring by Spring school. So a lot of people would actually, so it was actually a little bit different. I went from a culture where like all my friends got married before they graduated. And I just was kind of like a rebel. I just didn't want to follow that track, and I wanted to go out, start something. I wanted to have that flexibility where I can travel. And I did all that in my 20s. I traveled the world. I built, a really cool organization, and I built connections that I'm still profiting from. And now it's giving me that flexibility and that opportunity to kind of, all right, now I can kind of slow down and take that next chapter and get serious with someone. And, but it also kind of awakened me to like understand the problems that people have with money. Because I saw all these friends that graduated from college at 22, immediately got married, had these big fancy weddings, went in debt. Several of them went in debt from that, and seeing them divorced 3-4 years later from those decisions being part of that.
Wow.
And I think that woke me up at like, okay, if I want to do that, I want to be with someone. I actually see a lot of the problems out there. It helped me kind of approach, getting into a serious relationship. What can we do that help prevent these problems from coming up in the future? Yeah.
I think understanding some like regional cultural differences can go a long way in understanding why people get married at one point or the other. A friend of mine went to school in the St. Louis area, went to college in the St. Louis area, and a lot of his friends got married around the 25 age range. And I can relate to that. And I think there's a lot similar between his situation and my situation from a socioeconomic perspective. But then again, people who I don't have, people who I have a lot in common with, but Scott, have a similar background, a college background to you, went to a Christian school. There were a lot of people that got married right after they were engaged. They were engaged senior year, and they got married this summer right afterwards. And so definitely see a variation in it. My experience is that a lot of my friends are getting married right now, and they're in that 25 to 28 age range. A friend of mine, he went to like 9 weddings in a year. That's just incredible. And maybe that's another, that's a tangent we could go on, Brian, is that what about the financial impact of, being included in those weddings, right? And then how can you have that conversation with friends, to not spend an arm and a leg on that, not to mention bachelor parties, if that's something you do, look at how this snowballs, right? Yep. And I was involved in my brother's wedding last year, and I was grateful to him and his now wife for letting us just all we all happen to have the same shade of blue suit. And so we did that instead of having to all get the same exact matching suit from a place, from a place like Joseph Bank or something like that. And so it can really get out of hand. And this, depending upon where you are regionally and culturally, it can differ the time frame that you start spending this money, especially when you're just starting to earn money and you're in an entry level salary.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And I've gone through that wedding season. When you're married, it's that's times 2, right? Because if you're married, you're both invited.
+1.
What? Yeah, the +1. That's right. So we like to leave the listeners with just one piece of advice that is applicable to their life right now, something that's relatively easy to remember, easy to apply. If you had to kind of summarize what you should be thinking about or talking about as it relates to money and relationships before you're getting married, what would that be? Scott, let's start with you.
I'm just going to keep it simple. Just be transparent. I think that's the most important thing. Just be transparent where you are financially, what type of debt you have, what type of student loans, whatever it is. Be transparent, be open about it from as early on as possible, and talk about it. Just communicate. If you don't do that, surprises happen, and then tension comes, and then bad things happen.
Yeah.
Matt?
Something that I would suggest is the theme that I shared at the beginning of the episode is early and often. I think that's such a great piece of advice because it is a piece of advice that scales over time too. And so, talk about where you're going to go for your first date and the motivation behind that, and pay attention to the reception you get to that. Like you mentioned, Brian, because that could sound off some bells that might communicate to you that this isn't the right relationship for you. But then when you get on a more serious phase of life, when you're, talking about putting a wedding together, you've already had this financial conversation. So the anxiety or any sort of emotions associated with have kind of already been approached. And so you're not getting involved in a emotionally charged conversation, which can be difficult to do when you're having a conversation about financial management. And something I think is really great that I love about early and often, because I think it scales to parenthood too. I'm obviously not a parent, but I think that talking with your kids about finances early and often goes a long way. You can talk about habit formation, just encouraging your kid to make their bed every morning, how that relates to them checking and monitoring their savings account when it comes time for that. And so early and often is my piece of advice.
Yeah. And you brought up parenting, and I need to add a mistake that I think that my wife and I made is that we didn't consider the implications of one of us staying home while the children were, pre-K and the other working, and how that snowballed and the challenges that created for everybody. And boy, if I were to do it all over again, I would make sure that there is an understanding of how many kids that you want. And after that, what is the plan? Is it public, private school? And then how are you going to manage childhood? Is there going to be one primary caregiver? Is there going to be, as modern husbands, obviously we promote teamwork, where you're working together and you just figure out how you both can continue to excel in your careers and be great parents. How are you going to approach that? Because after 21 years of marriage, everything else seems to be much easier to manage. This has been a great conversation. So proud that you two are on our advisory board, and really look forward to having you back again someday.
Thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate being here, and thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brian. And it's awesome, serving with modern husbands, and keep up the great work.
A special thanks to our guests and, of course, to all of our listeners. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcast. Give us a rating and share our podcast with others. And check out our website at modernhusbands.com, where you can find articles, courses, toolkits, and other resources to help you and your partner manage money in the home as a team. Until next time, be well.